Thank you for joining me today as we continue our multi-part series on tips, tricks, and repairs to American Flyer steam engines. Today we're specifically looking at new 3D printed insulators as well as link coupler installation. I thought I'd take a moment to start the camera again and talk a little bit about something that you may or may not run into. In this particular engine, every single one of the treads was loose. And to repair that, you need to take everything apart, clean it. Well, ideally, you take everything apart, clean it, either use epoxy or super glue to then reaffix, because there's a three-part. There's an inside, an insulator, and then an outside metal rim. One of the options that is available to us these days are 3D printed insulators, and I picked up a few of these a while back, and since I needed to take apart all four wheels, one of the insulators was cracked, and I actually didn't have an original replacement insulator. I decided to go with the new replacement 3D printed ones. What's interesting about the 3D printed, and it's also true for original, and this is from 1946, is not every insulator fits the center, and there's just a little bit of variation in all of them. And so if you have enough insulators, enough, let's call them hubs, if you play around with it, sooner or later you get a good fit. What I discovered is with every single one of the 3D printed insulators, they were all just a little bit short, a little shy. So what I opted to do is I took this aluminum tin here, and I would put the insulator in here, and I turn my heat gun up here. I turn it on to about 300 degrees. I'm not going to do it now. And I'd actually heat the plastic up because I wanted it to be pliable, and then I'd manually fit it down over the hub while it was pretty hot and burn my fingers. But anyhow, that's what I did on each one of these. So that's issue number one. Issue number two then is these outside rims then didn't want to fit over the insulator and the hub. So there again, I put the outside rim back in the tin here, heated it up, got it real nice and hot so I could burn my fingers yet again, and then gently tapped the center in, and then usually I'd have to heat everything up together to try to get the insulator to kind of fit nicely, which I had varying levels of success. You can see this one's a little bit weird. It didn't quite fill in like I had hoped it would, but it seems to still run true. So I think we'll be okay, other than it looks a little deformed. But just something I thought I'd mention. And what's also kind of interesting is in the real world, when they were putting the metal rims on the outside of steam locomotive train tires, they would actually heat them up. They put a ring of fire. I don't know how many thousands degrees or hundreds of degrees they'd heat them up, but the tolerances were that the outside rim was actually a real tight fit, and so they'd have to heat it up, and then it'd expand. They'd put it around the inside rim, let it cool, and it would compress. And the reason this was so important is because you didn't want that thing coming apart when you're doing 80 miles an hour down the track. And there are some, again, a side note here, there are some interesting stories of steam engines that would spin out. They'd lose traction and they'd spin really quickly, and in a short amount of time would heat up the outer tread to the point where it expanded, and then it would come off. So that was a little bit troublesome. Unfortunately, that only happened in a few circumstances, but just something interesting I thought I'd share with you. Well, I've had some different people talk about wishing I'd do videos on installing couplers, and first I gotta say, if you want to see a great tutorial on uninstalling and installing link couplers, search for that on YouTube. Timco has a video that is just perfect. I can't do that kind of justice, but needless to say, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the installation. What we've got here is a 1946 Type 1 300 Atlantic well, believe it or not, it's all here. And it is missing a coupler. And for those of you that have been following the channel or know much about Flyer, know that in 46 they used a thin shank non-weighted coupler. And thanks to a friend of mine who sent me some link couplers that he had removed, thank you very, very much for that. I happen to have the right kind of link coupler here, and I'm going to install it. Now, link couplers are very simple. You've got the coupler, obviously, and then you've got a pin. And what you're doing, and you also need a tool that looks something like this. What you're doing is you're putting the coupler into the assembly here, and then you're tapping it, you're hitting it, and you're driving this little bit of the pin down and flattening it out. So you're creating a wedge that holds everything together. So we first put things like this, slide it through the hole. Then we need a way to support the back of the pin while we apply some force to the front of it. And you got to make sure that you get your pin and everything in the assembly. Now this I can see is a little bit bent, so I'm going to try to true it up here. I need to get something with a little bit more force. This big guy will do the trick, I think. There we go. So I'm trying to, get a nice flat surface so that my pin can slide through the hole and then have something to, I guess, pry against. Now, in this case, the pin I'm trying to use is it's pre-used, so it's already got a little bit of a flange there, which is making this challenging. Okay, so when it came time to add a link coupler, and I'm reusing old pins, I found that when I went to insert the pin into the front of, or the rear of the tender, it didn't fit in the hole, because you want it to actually go through the hole, because then you're going to ping it and spread out the surface so that it grips and actually, in theory, ends up with a little bit wider lip on here and keeps the coupler from moving. But what I've found was going on, and this is just another example, is you can see on these used ones, because they've already been pinged or smashed flat, they've got a little ridge, and that little ridge is what keeps you from using them or fitting them through the hole. So, your choice is to drill the hole out bigger. Well, now that's going to create other issues. So what I decided to do is use, again, poor man's lathe. Poor man's lathe, in my case, is a combination of a Dremel tool and my cordless drill. And you can see in this picture here that I have pin in my cordless drill, and then I have this sanding disc in the Dremel. And again, this is this is far from a very technical operation, but basically what I'm doing is I'm using the abrasiveness of this wheel to just come along and take that little ridge off. And so I'm spinning this piece and just gently touching it on there, and do it a little bit, and then come back over here and I do a test fit. Does it fit? If not, I come back here, I just, again, do just a little bit more, because what you don't want to do is take off too much material, because you'll be in the same boat as if you had drilled this out larger. If you make too deep a cut on the front of this pin or the edge of this pin, you won't have enough material to get it to catch when you ping it down. So I thought I would just try to clarify some of that process and steps that I went through to reuse a used pin on a link coupler. So now it fits in the hole, but it's not undersized. It's still a snug fit, which is what we want. So once we've got that, then we need to find something sturdy. In my case, I'm using this short section of rail. I'm guessing it's from 1860s because it's pretty light gauge, but still heavy for what I'm doing here. And then I've got a metal piece below it, again, because I'm going to actually pound on it. And you put your device, your peening device over it, and then you just tap it a few times. Get that nice solid ring. And then, voila. You've created just a slight increase in width of the pin, and you've got your link coupler linked in, real nice and snug. And you may need to make some adjustments. Like you can see, it's kind of twisted a little bit, so that's one of the things that you want to fine tune. But there you have it. Link coupler installed on a 1946 Type 1 tender that I still have a little bit of cleanup to do, but getting close. Hope you enjoyed this.